Within Sweden's borders exists an extraordinary family whose business holdings span billions, yet remains mysteriously absent from global consciousness. Across 6 generations, the Wallenbergs have transformed obscurity itself into their greatest asset, accumulating staggering wealth whilst operating perpetually behind institutional curtains. Their influence penetrates industries governing modern existence, from AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals to Ericsson Telecommunications, from Saab Defense Systems to numerous NASDAQ-listed enterprises. Yet search any international wealth rankings, and you'll discover something peculiar. The Wallenbergs simply don't appear. But here's what should trouble you about this reality. Every other billionaire family broadcasts their existence. They acquire yachts, commission palatial estates, dominate tabloid headlines. The Wallenbergs deliberately reject this visibility through generations of calculated discretion. They've engineered something far more potent than public recognition. They've engineered control itself. This family simultaneously financed Nazi Germany's industrial apparatus, whilst secretly plotting Hitler's assassination. They accumulated fortunes through wartime collaboration, yet deployed those same resources rescuing Holocaust victims. They've navigated every geopolitical transformation since 1856 empire collapses, revolutionary upheavals, economic catastrophes, consistently emerging wealthier, more entrenched, more invisible. Now here's where this becomes genuinely disturbing. A single family commands approximately $250 billion in consolidated assets. Their foundation networks control over $30 billion in accumulated capital. Their publicly listed company stakes exceed $660 billion in aggregate valuation. Yet virtually nobody recognizes their surnames. The question isn't whether the Wallenbergs possess influence. The question is, how did one Swedish family become powerful enough to shape continental economics whilst remaining completely unknown to the populations they economically govern? The Wallenberg saga commences with a solitary visionary whose unconventional thinking transformed Swedish financial architecture fundamentally. During the 1850s, Sweden confronted a paradoxical condition: abundant potential constrained by severe capital scarcity. The nation possessed talented entrepreneurs, natural resources, manufacturing capabilities. What Sweden lacked entirely: accessible mechanisms for channeling modest savings into productive enterprise. Enter André Oscar Wallenberg, a recently returned naval officer captivated by a transformative concept discovered within a specific text. Examining financial institution establishment, this intellectual spark ignited an audacious notion: establish Sweden's inaugural privately operated commercial bank. In 1856, Stockholm's Enskilda Bank began operations, challenging the previously monopolistic central bank's financial dominance. André comprehended something fundamental about economic development. Prosperity emerges when capital circulates throughout society rather than concentrating within governmental vaults. Now, here's where this gets controversial. Certain analysts argue that singular banking institutions cannot fundamentally restructure entire national economies. Others insist that financial infrastructure innovations represent watershed moments determining economic trajectories across generations. But I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Can one family's financial institution genuinely reshape entire national economies? Or does this overstate individual agency within broader systemic forces? The historical evidence accommodates multiple interpretations. Let's debate what you believe. André's descendants would provide empirical validation for the latter perspective. André's contribution established the operational template, yet his progeny transformed this foundation into institutional empire. His son, Knut Wallenberg, expanded Stockholm's Enskilda Bank beyond Swedish territorial boundaries, establishing international financial networks that would become foundational to the family's future dominance. Knut and his spouse Alice demonstrated remarkable philanthropic commitment despite their commercial prominence. Rather than sequestering accumulated capital within personal luxury acquisitions, they systematically redirected their fortune toward Swedish institutional development. They financed Stockholm's district development initiatives. More significantly, in 1917, they established the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, an organizational structure specifically designed advancing scientific investigation, technological innovation, and medical research advancement. This strategic decision would prove decisive. By channeling substantial wealth through philanthropic frameworks rather than maintaining direct individual ownership, the Wallenbergs pioneered a mechanism for preserving accumulated capital across generational transitions, whilst simultaneously establishing institutional legitimacy through charitable contributions. When Knut's half-sibling Marcus ascended to operational leadership, he inherited financial institutions requiring navigation through unprecedented geopolitical turbulence. Marcus demonstrated an almost obsessive commitment to enterprise expansion. Famously rejecting personal comfort entirely, historical accounts describe him wearing jackets deliberately inverted when fabric deterioration commenced, unwilling to invest resources in replacement garments when capital reallocation toward business development remained feasible. During his tenure, Marcus established control over numerous major industrial concerns. What became Alfa Laval, what transformed into ABB Industrial Systems, what evolved into Stora Enso Forest Products, what developed into Scania Automotive Manufacturing. His negotiation capabilities became invaluable throughout Europe's post-World War I Reconstruction period, positioning him as the continent's preferred arbitrator during economic turbulence. Yet Marcus confronted circumstances that initially seemed personally catastrophic. His uncle Knut, prior to his mortality, made an unexpected decision. Rather than bequeathing his accumulated fortune directly to Marcus, the obvious successor, he transferred substantial wealth into the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation structure. Marcus experienced this outcome as personal betrayal. He had expended decades constructing the family enterprise, yet found inheritance provisions redirecting capital toward institutional frameworks rather than individual family member control. If you've experienced situations where institutional frameworks supersede individual inheritance expectations, drop a comment. Your perspective matters because this legal mechanism would ultimately prove extraordinarily advantageous. Though this advantage remained imperceptible at the moment of initial implementation, remarkably, this strategic decision became the family's most consequential fortune preservation mechanism. Rather than dispersing inherited capital amongst multiple generational heirs, a pattern historically fragmenting family fortunes, the foundation structure maintained concentrated control. Subsequent decades demonstrated that this apparently disappointing outcome actually protected accumulated wealth far more effectively than conventional inheritance mechanisms. When Marcus's progeny inherited operational responsibility during the 1930s, Europe descended into unprecedented darkness. The Wallenberg brothers Jacob and Marcus Jr. faced genuinely impossible circumstances requiring navigation between governmental allegiances, commercial survival, and moral conscience. Sweden maintained official neutrality throughout the conflict, yet this neutrality concealed extraordinarily complex commercial realities. Stockholm's Enskilda Bank facilitated substantial business transactions between Swedish enterprises and Nazi-controlled German industrial apparatus. These transactions weren't peripheral. They constituted fundamental elements supporting German military-industrial production. Historical documentation subsequently revealed deeply troubling dimensions. SCB allegedly functioned as intermediary for concealing looted assets originated from German-occupied territories. including possessions seized from Jewish persecution victims. The bank's involvement transcended conventional wartime commerce. It represented potential complicity within systematic genocide financing mechanisms. Yet, simultaneously, the Wallenberg brothers engaged in extraordinarily dangerous activities benefiting European resistance movements. Jacob maintained clandestine communications with German resistance operatives, including meetings with resistance conspirators during Berlin visits. The brothers facilitated intelligence transmission between German dissidents and Allied governmental representatives. When the July 20th assassination conspiracy targeting Hitler proceeded, the Wallenbergs' involvement ran sufficiently deep that continued German return visits became literally lethal propositions. This contradictory duality, simultaneous Nazi collaboration and resistance participation, encapsulates the Wallenberg family's fundamental operational philosophy, maintaining profitable relationships across every geopolitical faction, whilst positioning themselves as essential intermediaries regardless of ultimate conflict resolution. More remarkably, whilst Jacob navigated these labyrinthine political complexities, his nephew, Raoul Wallenberg, conducted what many historians consider among World War II's most extraordinary humanitarian operations. Posted to Nazi-occupied Budapest during 1944, Raoul forged Swedish protective documentation for Hungarian Jewish populations targeted for deportation. He physically intercepted trains transporting victims toward extermination facilities. Through combination of negotiation, fabricated paperwork, and sheer personal courage, Raoul rescued thousands from systematic genocide. When Soviet forces entered Budapest, they captured Raoul suspecting Western intelligence activities. Despite decades of Swedish governmental pressure, the Soviet Union never acknowledged his fate with certainty. Soviet officials subsequently claimed Raoul died from cardiac failure during imprisonment in 1947, when he was merely 35 years old. The Wallenbergs faced agonizing circumstances. Their family member possessed heroic humanitarian credentials, yet remained imprisoned by Soviet governance structures. Subsequently, the family pursued business dealings with Stalin's regime, including exploratory discussions regarding substantial monetary loans. If you've questioned whether institutional interests supersede personal humanitarian obligations, drop a comment. These remain genuinely unanswered questions regarding whether the Wallenbergs adequately leveraged their influence advocating for Raoul's liberation. Following World War II's conclusion, the Wallenberg family confronted simultaneous circumstances: reputational damage from disclosed Nazi collaboration alongside institutional necessity for maintaining operational continuity. American governmental authorities blacklisted the Wallenberg brothers as specially blocked nationals, effectively freezing their international commercial activities. Yet this apparent catastrophe proved temporary. Swedish governmental authorities and international business communities ultimately recognized Wallenberg enterprise necessity within post-war European reconstruction processes. Within years, blacklist designations were rescinded, permitting operational resumption. Jacob stepped aside from active leadership during 1946, transferring operational authority toward his brother Marcus Jr. Yet Marcus Jr. required additional decades for complete succession establishment. Throughout the 1950s to 1970s, Marcus Jr. undertook substantial enterprise restructuring, converting Atlas Diesel into Atlas Copco industrial equipment manufacturing, facilitating Swedish fighter jet development through Saab, managing exceptionally complex international commerce negotiations. Marcus Jr. maintained centralized control throughout his 50-year tenure from the 1930s until his 1982 mortality. Yet this concentration created generational succession complications. His son, Mark, underwent comprehensive preparation for inevitable leadership transition. Yet, at merely 47 years old, Mark terminated his own existence in 1971. This tragedy left succession authority fundamentally disrupted. Peter, Wallenberg Mark's brother, had deliberately pursued alternative career pathways, initiating professional development outside conventional family enterprise structures. Yet Mark's unexpected death thrust Peter toward unexpected leadership obligations. Peter gradually transformed this apparent disadvantage into operational advantage. Whereas Mark represented generational expectation continuation, Peter approached family enterprise administration from refreshingly unconventional perspectives. He orchestrated substantial share acquisitions within Atlas Copco and Stora Enso Forestry Enterprise. Recovered through negotiations with Volvo Manufacturing, these acquisitions demonstrated that the Wallenberg family maintained capacity for decisive action, even when external observers questioned preparedness. The contemporary Wallenberg Empire, currently administered by fifth-generation leadership, including Jacob Wallenberg, Peter Wallenberg Jr., and Marcus Wallenberg, commands staggering financial resources. Approximately $250 billion in consolidated valuation. Yet, despite this extraordinary magnitude, the Wallenberg family remains systematically absent from international billionaire rankings. Why? Because the overwhelming preponderance of their wealth exists within foundation organizational structures rather than individual personal possession. Foundation frameworks contain approximately $30 billion in accumulated capital. Publicly traded enterprise stakes connected to Wallenberg family interests exceed $660 billion in aggregate valuation. Yet, because this capital remains technically institutional rather than personal, the family remains invisible within wealth hierarchies. This represents the Wallenberg family's most consequential strategic innovation. They've discovered methods for exercising complete enterprise control whilst possessing technically minimal individual wealth recognition. They operate companies employing hundreds of thousands of workers, manufacture products utilized by hundreds of millions of consumers, yet appear economically immaterial within conventional measurement frameworks. Contemporary Swedish governance represents this dynamic perfectly. As one prominent Swedish historian observed, every Swedish government, regardless of ideological orientation, comprehends that functional governance requires Wallenberg family institutional cooperation. This represents ultimate political power, not requiring public recognition, yet maintaining absolute operational necessity. The Wallenberg family motto, derived from Latin, encapsulates their philosophical foundation: esse non videri. To exist rather than appear, they concentrate exclusively upon enterprise management rather than personal celebrity cultivation. They grant minimal media interviews, and when communication occurs, discussions remain rigorously restricted toward professional considerations, institutional philanthropy, and research advancement initiatives. Here's my prediction. The Wallenbergs will maintain their multi-generational institutional control structure indefinitely because their methodology actively repels the governmental scrutiny and political pressures that typically destabilize other concentrated wealth scenarios. I could be wrong. Historical patterns occasionally generate unexpected disruptions. Yet, the foundation architecture appears sufficiently sophisticated for perpetuating wealth concentration indefinitely. Let's see where the community stands. What emerges most starkly from the Wallenberg family narrative involves the extraordinary efficacy of systematic invisibility combined with fundamental indispensability. They've engineered themselves into positions where questioning their authority simultaneously questions national economic functionality itself. I've examined their historical foundations, their wartime complicity and heroism, their post-war reconstruction, and their contemporary institutional dominance. But I might have overlooked crucial considerations. What aspects of the Wallenberg family narrative concern you most? What institutional mechanisms require examination? What historical parallels should inform our understanding? Economic historians, Swedish observers, governance specialists, institutional analysts, all perspectives welcome in the comments. Let's collectively develop comprehensive understanding. Because here's what the Wallenberg family ultimately demonstrates. Genuine power transcends celebrity recognition. The most consequential influence operates perpetually behind institutional curtains, reshaping economic circumstances whilst remaining systematically invisible to populations experiencing those transformations. The Wallenbergs represent this principle's most complete contemporary manifestation. Family members commanding continental economic destiny whilst maintaining absolute anonymity. If this institutional analysis fundamentally altered your comprehension regarding how concentrated wealth actually functions within modern societies, hit subscribe. Because understanding these invisible power structures proves increasingly essential. Check the description for historical Swedish financial documentation, contemporary Wallenberg family institutional analysis, and detailed examination of how foundation frameworks maintain transgenerational wealth concentration